Near Carrhae in 53 BC, 7 Roman legions stood packed across the open Mesopotamian plain. Thousands of legionaries raised their shields, prepared their pila, and waited for an enemy line that never appeared. Light infantry and cavalry guarded the edges of the formation, yet beyond them, there were only mounted figures emerging through dust, releasing arrows, and disappearing before Roman weapons could reach them. This was not an empty sea of sand, but cultivated Mesopotamian steppe crossed by rivers and settlements. Even so, its open ground offered the mobile Parthian army space to maneuver around Rome. Marcus Licinius Crassus had brought a force commonly estimated at around 40,000 men, including legionaries, allied infantry, and several thousand cavalry. Ancient and modern totals differ, but the Romans clearly outnumbered the army facing them. That advantage seemed meaningless when the Parthians refused to fight on Roman terms. According to Plutarch, deep drums began sounding across the plain. Their low, continuous thunder rolled toward the Roman ranks. Parthian cavalry then revealed armor that had been concealed beneath coverings. Metal flashed in the sunlight. Heavy cataphracts appeared beside clouds of mounted archers, while even some horses were protected by armor. Surena was attacking Roman confidence before committing his full tactical system. The horse archers spread around the legions and began firing from beyond the effective range of Roman pila. Whenever legionaries advanced, the riders withdrew. Some turned in the saddle and continued shooting while their horses carried them away. When the Romans stopped, the Parthians returned from another direction and resumed the attack. Crassus could hope that the archers would eventually exhaust their ammunition. But behind the moving cavalry waited a train of camels carrying reserve arrows. Riders emptied their quivers, withdrew to the supply line, received fresh ammunition, and returned. What should have been a temporary storm became a system of continuous fire. The Romans could close their shields for protection, but tighter formations created new dangers. Soldiers moved slowly and could not catch the horse archers. They found it harder to react when armored cataphracts approached. Men in the center could contribute little, while the entire army remained exposed and isolated on the plain. If the legionaries opened their ranks to fight the cataphracts, arrows struck the gaps. If they closed together to survive the arrows, heavy cavalry could advance and threaten the compressed formation. Every Roman response created another weakness for Surena to exploit. The legions were not collapsing through cowardice. They were disciplined heavy infantry trapped against an enemy that controlled distance, movement, and ammunition. How could roughly 10,000 Parthian cavalry surround, paralyze, and ultimately destroy a Roman army several times larger, almost without placing infantry on the battlefield? Marcus Licinius Crassus was among the richest and most powerful men in the Roman Republic. He belonged to the political alliance commonly called the First Triumvirate, alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey. Yet wealth and influence did not give him the kind of military reputation enjoyed by his partners. Pompey had won celebrated victories in the east, while Caesar was building fame through conquest in Gaul. Crassus had defeated the revolt of Spartacus, but he still lacked a campaign of comparable scale and prestige. Ancient writers often emphasize personal ambition when explaining his invasion of Parthia. That motive mattered, but it should not stand alone. Rome and Parthia were already moving toward the same frontier. During the previous decades, Roman armies had expanded through Asia Minor, defeated Mithridates VI, intervened in Armenia, and established the province of Syria. Roman influence now reached the Euphrates, while Parthian power extended westward from Mesopotamia. Carrhae was therefore not simply the sudden adventure of one greedy commander. It emerged from a wider struggle over influence, alliances, and control of the eastern frontier. The Euphrates was becoming a strategic boundary between two expanding powers, even though neither side treated it as an absolutely fixed border in every circumstance. In 55 BC, Crassus received command of Syria. From that base, he could recruit troops, assemble legions, collect money and provisions, cross the Euphrates, and move toward the wealthy cities of Mesopotamia. During his first operations, Roman forces occupied several positions east of the river and left garrisons behind. In the spring of 53 BC, Crassus returned with a much larger army and prepared to advance deeper into Parthian territory. At this stage, King Artavasdes II of Armenia offered assistance. He proposed supplying infantry and cavalry, and he advised Crassus to march through Armenia rather than directly across the Mesopotamian plain. The northern route would have been longer, but its hills and broken terrain could restrict Parthian cavalry. It also offered the possibility of combining Roman and Armenian forces while protecting the army's flanks. Crassus rejected that plan. The decision is often presented as one of his greatest mistakes. Yet the Armenian route was not free from difficulty. It required a longer march, depended on complicated local politics, and could delay the campaign. Even so, Artavasdes had correctly identified the central danger. Roman heavy infantry should not face a highly mobile cavalry army on open ground without strong mounted support. Parthian king Orodes II responded by dividing his forces. He led one army toward Armenia, preventing Artavasdes from giving Crassus the assistance he had promised and protecting the northern approach. The defense of Mesopotamia was entrusted to Surena. Surena commanded far fewer soldiers than Crassus, but his force was built for the terrain. It centered on horse archers and heavily armored cataphracts. These troops were not intended to hold a fixed line against Roman infantry. They were designed to move, surround, harass, and punish any formation that became isolated or tried to pursue. Crassus' greatest mistake was not simply entering a waterless desert. The region around Carrhae contained settlements, rivers, and cultivated land. The true danger was operational. He lacked reliable information about Surena's army, possessed too little cavalry, underestimated the Parthian composite bow, knew nothing of the camel train carrying reserve arrows, and advanced into ground where his enemy could maneuver freely. His experience against Spartacus and confidence in legionary discipline may have encouraged him to believe Roman infantry could force any opponent into a decisive battle on demand. Crassus did not march into empty wilderness. He entered a battlefield Surena understood far better than he did. Surena's victory at Carrhae began with the army he chose to bring. Ancient sources present him as a young but highly capable Parthian commander connected to the powerful Suren noble house. The name Surena may have reflected a family title as much as a personal name. He served King Orodes II, controlled troops and retainers linked to his own household, and understood the plains of Mesopotamia far better than the invading Romans. While Orodes moved toward Armenia, Surena received responsibility for the central approach. He did not try to match Crassus legion for legion. Instead, he assembled a smaller force designed for speed, distance, and coordination. Modern reconstructions commonly place his army at about 10,000 cavalry, roughly 9,000 horse archers, and 1,000 heavily armored cataphracts. These numbers remain estimates, but they describe the basic structure of the force that confronted Rome. Most of Surena's soldiers were horse archers. They used compact composite bows suited to firing from horseback. Their strength did not come from one devastating volley. It came from their ability to approach, shoot, withdraw, change direction, and return before Roman infantry could close the distance. A horse archer could remain beyond the effective range of the Roman pilum, release arrows into a dense formation, and move away when legionaries advanced. Groups could spread around the enemy, attack from different angles, and concentrate fire on a weak sector. If Roman troops attempted to pursue, the riders could draw them farther from the main body. The famous Parthian shot formed part of this system. A rider could turn his upper body and shoot backward while his horse continued moving away. To Roman observers, retreat normally suggested that an enemy had broken. Against Parthian cavalry, however, pursuit could increase danger. The horse archer remained capable of inflicting casualties while preserving distance, and a false retreat could stretch or isolate the pursuing formation. This was not merely a display of individual skill. It required trained horses, repeated practice, balance, timing, and cooperation between riders. A successful withdrawal had to remain organized enough for the unit to turn, resupply, or attack again. What looked like flight could be a controlled part of the battle plan. The second element of Surena's army was the cataphract. These were heavy cavalrymen whose riders and horses could be protected by scale armor or linked metal defenses. Their most important weapon was a long lance capable of delivering a powerful thrust from a moving horse. At Carrhae, the cataphracts did not need to charge the entire Roman army continuously. Their presence created a constant threat. If legionaries loosened their shield formation to move faster or attack the horse archers, heavy cavalry could advance against the openings. Cataphracts could also block Roman counterattacks, strike isolated groups, and prevent detached troops from returning safely. The two cavalry types supported one another. Horse archers encouraged the Romans to close ranks and raise their shields. A compressed formation became slower and less able to maneuver. Cataphracts then approached, forcing legionaries to turn outward, prepare their pila, or open gaps for close combat. When the Romans adjusted to meet the heavy cavalry, the cataphracts could withdraw and the arrows could return. Surena's greatest advantage may have been logistical rather than purely tactical. His army reportedly included a train of around 1,000 camels carrying reserve arrows. Horse archers did not have to leave the battle after emptying their quivers. They could ride back, collect fresh ammunition, and resume shooting. Crassus may have expected the Parthians eventually to exhaust their supply. Surena had prepared specifically to prevent that. The camel train transformed archery from a limited opening phase into pressure that could continue for hours. Carrhae was therefore not simply a victory by skilled bowmen. It was a victory by an ammunition system designed before the first arrow was released. Surena's force was not invincible in every environment. It would have faced greater difficulty in mountains, narrow passes, fortified ground, or terrain without enough space and grazing for horses. It also depended on an uninterrupted supply of arrows and on avoiding enemy cavalry capable of holding the riders in place. This was why the Armenian route proposed to Crassus mattered. Broken ground could have reduced the freedom of Parthian cavalry and allowed Roman infantry to use terrain as protection. On the open plains near Carrhae, however, Surena had almost ideal conditions. His strength did not lie in horse archers, cataphracts, or camels separately. It lay in combining them into one repeating system. Arrows forced the Romans to react, heavy cavalry punished the reaction, and the supply train allowed the process to begin again. Each element protected the others, leaving Crassus unable to choose between movement and defense. Rome faced not separate weapons, but a coordinated machine built to exhaust infantry slowly. In early May 53 BC, Marcus Licinius Crassus crossed the Euphrates near Zeugma and led his army into Mesopotamia. His force included 7 Roman legions, several thousand cavalry, light infantry, allied troops, baggage animals, servants, and a long supply train. Ancient and modern estimates differ, but the invasion army is often placed near 40,000 men. It was a powerful force by Roman standards, built around disciplined heavy infantry and the expectation that any enemy could eventually be brought into close battle. One of Crassus's officers, Gaius Cassius Longinus, advised the army to remain near the Euphrates. Following the river would provide water, protect one flank, maintain contact with Roman positions, and make it harder for Parthian cavalry to surround the column completely. The route might also allow supplies or boats to support the advance. Crassus chose instead to move inland. The landscape was not a desert. Roads, cultivated areas, watercourses, and settlements existed across the region. Nevertheless, the broad stretches between them offered few barriers against mounted troops. Roman infantry could march across this ground, but it could not prevent cavalry from choosing when and where to engage. He believed the Parthians were retreating eastward and wanted to catch them before they could escape or gather a larger army. Scouts and visible traces encouraged that belief, but those signs did not reveal the true situation. Surena was keeping his mounted force mobile and largely beyond Roman sight, waiting for the invaders to leave the safer river corridor and enter ground better suited to cavalry. As the march continued, the Roman army became increasingly tired. Reports suggested that Parthian troops were nearby, and some officers urged Crassus to stop, rest, inspect the terrain, and organize the army for battle on the following morning. Crassus allowed the soldiers only a brief meal while remaining in formation, then ordered the advance to continue. The Romans were moving toward battle without a clear understanding of the enemy's numbers, weapons, or logistical system. They did not know Surena had brought a large reserve of arrows on camels. They had no established plan for stopping horse archers who could shoot from beyond pilum range. Their cavalry was too limited to control the surrounding plain. When Parthian forces finally appeared, Crassus arranged much of his infantry in a large hollow square. The exact structure remains debated, but the purpose was clear: A formation facing outward on all sides could resist attacks from the front, rear, and flanks. It also kept the legions close together and helped protect baggage, servants, and supporting troops in the center. Yet the same formation created serious weaknesses. It was slow, difficult to maneuver, and almost impossible to use for pursuit. Soldiers in the interior could contribute little to the fighting. Orders had to travel across a broad mass of men, while every side of the square remained exposed to mounted archers. Crassus had tried to prevent encirclement by turning the army into a moving fortress, but a fortress cannot defeat an enemy that refuses to approach its walls. The Parthians did not need to break a fixed battle line or hold ground against a Roman charge. They could circle, shoot, withdraw, and return whenever the legions attempted to move. The Roman commander had entered Mesopotamia expecting to force a decisive engagement. Instead, he had marched into a battlefield where Surena controlled distance, timing, and direction. When the first riders appeared through the dust, the 7 legions were no longer facing an army they could advance upon. They were standing inside a moving ring that had been designed to tighten around them. In 53 BC, the Roman army near Carrhae waited for a conventional battle line. Instead, the Parthians approached under the sound of deep drums, whose heavy rhythm carried across the plain. As the distance closed, armored riders uncovered polished metal defenses that flashed in the sunlight. Cataphracts formed the hard center of Surena's force, while horse archers spread outward on both wings. The Romans saw no dense infantry line to attack, no fixed center to break, and no enemy willing to stand inside the reach of legionary swords. Every movement of the Parthian cavalry reinforced the uncertainty surrounding the Roman square. Surena appears to have considered a direct cavalry assault, but the Roman formation remained compact. Rather than waste armored riders against disciplined heavy infantry, he relied on missile fire. The horse archers circled the Roman square and began shooting from beyond effective pilum range. Their movement made it difficult for Roman officers to identify a single direction of attack. Crassus sent light infantry forward to drive the archers away. These troops were faster than legionaries, but they were not fast enough to catch mounted opponents. Their lighter shields and armor offered less protection, and every attempt to close the distance exposed them to arrows. The Parthians simply moved back, continued shooting, and drew the skirmishers away from support. Unable to force combat, the Roman light troops retreated into the main formation. With the screen removed, the legions became a massive target. Arrows came from several directions and fell continuously into the packed ranks. Roman shields and armor saved many lives, but they could not protect every part of the body. Hands, arms, legs, faces, and feet remained vulnerable. Some arrows struck shields and remained embedded, making them heavier and harder to use. Others wounded horses, baggage animals, servants, and soldiers crowded behind the fighting line. The Romans were not destroyed in a single moment. They were weakened gradually, one man and one formation at a time. Wounded soldiers could not easily leave the square without opening gaps. Fallen men blocked movement. Officers struggled to transmit orders through the drums, shouting, dust, and confusion. The army maintained discipline, but discipline alone could not create an enemy within reach. Crassus believed the Parthians would eventually run out of arrows. In many ancient battles, that expectation would have been reasonable. An archer could carry only a limited number of missiles. Surena, however, had prepared for exactly this calculation. Behind the fighting cavalry stood camels loaded with reserve arrows. Horse archers withdrew in groups, refilled their quivers, and returned to the circle. When the Romans recognized the resupply system, they understood that waiting would not solve the problem. The enemy did not need to charge. Time itself favored Parthia. Every hour brought more wounds, more exhaustion, and less confidence. Crassus therefore ordered his son Publius to lead a mobile counterattack. Publius commanded Gallic cavalry that had served with Caesar, additional horsemen, light infantry, and several cohorts of legionaries. This force represented one of the few parts of the Roman army capable of moving quickly enough to threaten the horse archers. Publius advanced aggressively. The Parthian riders withdrew, and the Romans believed they had finally forced the enemy to flee. The pursuit continued across the open ground. But the retreat was controlled. The archers maintained distance while drawing Publius farther from the main army, beyond immediate support and into terrain where Surena could surround him. Once the Roman detachment was isolated, the Parthians turned. Horse archers spread around Publius and resumed firing from several directions. Cataphracts appeared to block the route back. The Roman cavalry now faced armored opponents whose horses and riders carried heavier protection and longer lances. The Gallic horsemen fought with remarkable courage, but individual bravery could not overcome the tactical imbalance. Their mounts were generally less protected, and their weapons were shorter than the cataphract lances. Ancient accounts describe some Gauls attempting to drag Parthian riders from their horses, or strike the animals beneath their armor. Such attacks caused resistance, but they could not break the encirclement. Publius tried to organize his troops on rising or broken ground, where the wounded and exhausted gathered into a defensive position. Yet arrows continued to fall, and cataphracts threatened every attempt to move. The detachment had been separated too far from Crassus for rescue. Publius and many of his officers were killed, while most of the force was destroyed or captured. The Parthians then returned toward the main Roman army carrying Publius's head on a spear. The display was intended to destroy morale, prove that the counterattack had failed, and show Crassus that his best mobile troops were gone. Crassus had lost not only his son, but also the force most capable of contesting Parthian movement. He attempted to encourage the legions and remind them that Rome's survival mattered more than personal grief. Yet from that moment, the army had almost no realistic way to regain the initiative. The horse archers resumed their positions and continued firing. Cataphracts approached in threatening groups, forcing legionaries to turn, lift shields, close ranks, and prepare for impact. Whenever the Romans opened their formation, arrows struck the gaps. Whenever they compressed, heavy cavalry increased the pressure. The legions did not immediately collapse. Their training and cohesion allowed them to remain in formation for hours. But standing firm no longer offered a path to victory. It only preserved the army until darkness made withdrawal possible. By evening, thousands were dead or wounded. Publius's detachment no longer existed. Parthian cavalry remained mobile, and the ammunition supply had not been broken. Crassus had lost control of the battle's tempo and much of his ability to command effectively. Carrhae was not a defeat caused by Roman cowardice. The legions lost because they could not catch the horse archers, stop the flow of arrows, protect separated units, or force Surena into close combat. Rome had brought an army built to win a decisive infantry battle. Surena simply refused to give them one. After darkness ended the fighting at Carrhae, the surviving Roman officers organized a retreat toward the nearby city. The legions had endured the arrow storm for hours, but they could not remain on the field until morning. Many dead, badly wounded men, damaged equipment, baggage animals, and part of the supply train had to be abandoned. Most of the remaining troops reached Carrhae during the night. The withdrawal showed that Roman discipline had not disappeared, even after the destruction of Publius's force and the collapse of Crassus's command. Yet the retreat was confused. A detachment led by Vargunteus lost its way and was later surrounded and destroyed by the Parthians. Carrhae offered temporary shelter, not safety. Surena controlled the surrounding countryside and could isolate the city. The Romans therefore had to continue moving before the Parthians closed every route. Gaius Cassius Longinus separated from the main force and eventually escaped with part of the army toward Syria. The survivors helped defend Roman territory against further Parthian pressure. Cassius later became one of the men involved in the assassination of Julius Caesar, but that belongs to another story. At Carrhae, his importance was simpler. He preserved a fragment of the invasion army when the campaign itself had already failed. Crassus and the troops, still with him, attempted to reach higher, more broken ground where Parthian cavalry would have less freedom to maneuver. The march quickly became another crisis. Guides led parts of the army along uncertain routes. Units became separated, soldiers were exhausted, and Parthian riders continued to follow. Some groups reached safer terrain, others were forced to turn back. Crassus became isolated with a reduced body of troops until Roman officers returned to assist him. Surena then offered negotiations. The intentions behind the meeting remain uncertain. Surena may have wanted a formal agreement, the surrender of Crassus, or an opportunity to end resistance without another costly pursuit. Crassus reportedly went to the meeting under pressure from his own exhausted soldiers, who feared that refusing would bring another attack. During the encounter, Parthian attendants attempted to place Crassus on a horse. A struggle followed. Octavius and other Romans resisted. Violence broke out, and Crassus was killed in the confusion. Later traditions added dramatic details, especially the story that molten gold was poured into his mouth as punishment for greed. This tale should not be presented as established fact. The safer conclusion is that Crassus died during a chaotic negotiation after losing control of his army. Ancient casualty totals vary, but the disaster was enormous. Around 10,000 Romans may have escaped, about 10,000 were reportedly captured, and many others were killed or missing. Crassus and Publius were dead, several legionary standards were lost, and the 7 legions no longer existed as an organized invading force. Carrhae ended Rome's immediate advance into Mesopotamia and established Parthia as a major rival. The Euphrates gained greater importance as a strategic frontier, while Roman leaders inherited a powerful desire to recover the captured standards and avenge the defeat. Carrhae was not the day Roman courage failed. It was the day Roman heavy infantry met an enemy it could neither catch nor force into close battle. Surena won through mobility, coordination, and logistics, turning Rome's greatest strength into a helpless target on the open plain.